No one dared speak to the millionaire, until the black cleaning lady's daughter offered him a lollipop. "Get that child out of here now." Bradley Torres's shout echoed through the penthouse hallway, causing Carmen to cower as she held her 5-year-old daughter's hand tightly. "This is no place for people like you to be walking around with children." The building manager of Manhattan's most luxurious building was red with rage, pointing an accusing finger at little Jade, who held a colorful lollipop and watched everything with wide eyes. It was only her second day accompanying her mother to work after the daycare center closed due to non-payment. Carmen Rodriguez, 28, never imagined that accepting that job as a cleaning lady in billionaire Jonathan Pierce's penthouse would become a daily lesson in humiliation. The salary was double what she could get anywhere else, but the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. "Mr. Torres, please," Carmen whispered, keeping her voice down so as not to wake her boss, who was working in his office. "She's quiet, she won't bother anyone. Her school closed and I have no one to leave her with." "I don't care." Bradley spat the words with disdain. "A slum kid has no place in a $15 million penthouse. Mr. Pierce pays for professional services, not daycare." Jade clutched the lollipop to her chest, her large intelligent eyes taking in every poisonous word. Even at 5, she understood perfectly when someone was being cruel to her mother. It was at that moment that a door opened silently at the end of the hallway. Jonathan Pierce, the most feared man on Wall Street, watched the scene with an indecipherably neutral expression. At 42, his presence alone was enough to make executives tremble, and his $8 billion fortune had been built on a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in business. Bradley hadn't noticed him yet, continuing his show of authority. "If it happens again, you're fired. Got that? And don't bother crying or making a scene, because people like you are a dime a dozen." "People like us?" Carmen's voice came out firmer than she had intended. For the first time, she lifted her chin and looked directly into the manager's eyes. "Can you explain exactly what you mean by that?" Bradley smiled cruelly, unaware that he was being watched. "You know very well what I meant. You should be grateful for the opportunity to work in a place like this, instead of making demands." The silence that followed was broken only by the almost imperceptible sound of expensive footsteps approaching on the marble floor of the hallway. Jonathan Pierce was walking slowly toward the group, his icy blue eyes fixed on Bradley. Jade, who had been silent, suddenly let go of her mother's hand and took a few steps toward the tall man in the impeccable suit. With the innocence typical of a child, she held out her colorful lollipop toward him. "Would you like a piece of my lollipop?" she asked in her sweet, clear voice. "Mommy always says that sharing candy makes people less angry." The world seemed to freeze at that moment. Bradley paled when he noticed Jonathan there. Carmen held her breath, and something very strange happened to the billionaire's normally cold expression. For a moment that lasted an eternity, Jonathan Pierce looked at the little girl with her lollipop offered, then at her mother trying to protect her, and finally at Bradley, who was now sweating coldly. There, in that marble hallway where prejudice had just revealed itself in all its cruelty, something was about to change forever. And while everyone watched in silence, Jonathan did something no one had ever seen him do before. If this story of courage and transformation touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened after that moment changed not only the life of that family, but exposed a network of discrimination that no one imagined existed in the corridors of power. Jonathan Pierce slowly bent down to Jade's height, accepting the lollipop with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his ruthless reputation. "Thank you," he said simply, his deep voice echoing through the silent hallway. Bradley Torres felt the blood freeze in his veins. 20 years managing luxury properties, and he had never seen the feared billionaire interact with any child, let alone accept something from someone he considered inappropriate for that environment. "Mr. Pierce," Bradley stammered, breaking into a cold sweat. "I was just explaining the building rules to the employee. We don't want situations like this to happen again." Jonathan rose slowly, his icy blue eyes fixed on Bradley with an intensity that made the manager take a step back. "Situations like this?" he repeated, his voice low and controlled. "Could you be more specific about what exactly the problem is?" Carmen watched the scene with a mixture of relief and apprehension. At 28, she had learned that moments like this could quickly turn against her. She had grown up in Detroit, the daughter of a single nurse who worked 3 jobs to support them. She had known prejudice in all its subtle and explicit forms. "Well, sir," Bradley continued, trying to regain his composure, "we have standards to uphold. The other residents pay a very high condominium fee precisely to ensure a select environment. Select, Jonathan repeated, savoring the word as if it were bitter. His eyes moved from Bradley to Carmen, then to Jade, who was still holding a piece of the lollipop and watching everything with childlike curiosity. Carmen decided to break the silence before the situation deteriorated further. Mr. Pierce, I apologize for the interruption. I know this is inappropriate, and I assure you it won't happen again. Her voice was firm, dignified, without a trace of the submission Bradley had expected. Why would it be inappropriate? Jonathan asked, surprising everyone. A polite child offering something sweet to a stranger? In what world is that considered a problem? Bradley realized he was losing control of the situation. With all due respect, Mr. Pierce, but we have protocols. Employees are not supposed to bring guests during working hours. It's a security issue and... Security. Jonathan interrupted, his voice carrying a dangerous note. A 5-year-old child poses a threat to the security of this building? Jade, unaware of the tension around her, tugged at Jonathan's suit jacket. My lollipop is strawberry. It's my favorite flavor. What's yours? The innocent question created a surreal moment. Here was Jonathan Pierce, the man whose decisions moved billions of dollars daily, being asked about candy preferences by a child. I don't think I've ever thought about it, he replied honestly, an almost vulnerable expression briefly crossing his face. Carmen felt something stir in her chest. In that moment, she saw not the intimidating billionaire, but a man who had perhaps forgotten simple things like favorite lollipop flavors. Bradley, desperate to regain control, made his fatal mistake. Mr. Pierce, with all due respect, you can't allow these people to take advantage of your kindness. They know exactly how to manipulate situations to their advantage. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan turned slowly toward Bradley, and Carmen saw something cold and deadly in his eyes. These kinds of people, Jonathan repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Elaborate. Bradley realized he had crossed a line, but it was too late to back down. People from certain backgrounds often use children to elicit sympathy and gain special benefits. It's an old tactic. Carmen felt anger boiling in her veins, but she kept her composure. Years of experience had taught her that exploding at moments like this would only confirm the prejudices that people like Bradley carried. Jade, sensing the tension, moved closer to her mother and held her hand. Mommy, why is that man talking like that? It was that innocent question that broke something inside Carmen. She bent down, kissed her daughter's forehead, and whispered, sometimes people say bad things when they're afraid, sweetheart. Jonathan watched every detail of the interaction, seeing the quiet strength with which Carmen protected her daughter, the dignity with which she faced humiliation, and something in his expression hardened even more. Mr. Torres, Jonathan said finally, his voice cutting like ice. I believe we have matters to discuss. In private. Bradley swallowed hard, realizing he had made a mistake that could cost him dearly. Yes, sir. Of course. Carmen began gathering her cleaning supplies, preparing to leave discreetly, but Jonathan caught her again. Carmen, he said, remembering her name from the hiring documents. Please continue your work. Jade can stay in the library. There are children's books there. Each word was spoken as a clear statement of where he stood in the situation. Carmen nodded, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and caution. As he followed Bradley down the hall toward the office, Jonathan glanced back one last time. Carmen was bending down to talk to Jade, her gentle hands smoothing the girl's curly hair. There was something about that scene that touched a part of his soul he thought had died long ago. What Bradley Torres didn't know was that this private conversation would be just the beginning of a series of revelations that would not only change his future, but expose a web of systematic discrimination that infected Manhattan's most exclusive building like a silent cancer. Jonathan's office door closed with a soft click, but the silence that followed was charged with an almost palpable tension. Bradley Torres tried to maintain his usual composure, but small beads of sweat betrayed his growing nervousness. Sit down, Jonathan said, his voice neutral as he walked over to the window that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. Outside, the city bustled with millions of lives, each fighting their own daily battles. Bradley obeyed, settling into the Italian leather chair as he watched his boss's broad back. 20 years of managing luxury properties had taught him how to read wealthy people, but Jonathan Pierce had always been an enigma. Today, however, there was something different in the air. "Tell me about your hiring protocols for employees," Jonathan said without turning around. "Specifically, the criteria you use to determine who is suitable to work here." The question seemed simple, but Bradley sensed a trap hidden in the words. "Well, Mr. Pierce, we always prioritize professionals with solid references, proven experience, and of course, who fit the standard of excellence our residents expect." "Standard of excellence," Jonathan repeated slowly. "Interesting. And how exactly do you define that?" Bradley swallowed hard. "Personal presentation, punctuality, discretion, ability to maintain residents' privacy." "Carmen possesses all of those qualities," Jonathan interrupted, finally turning to face Bradley. "So what exactly is the problem?" It was at that moment that Bradley made his second fatal mistake. Interpreting Jonathan's calmness as tacit agreement, he leaned forward conspiratorially. "Let's be honest, Mr. Pierce. People like her, well, they always end up causing trouble. Today it's a child, tomorrow it'll be her unemployed boyfriend, then her relatives asking for favors. It's always the same with these people." Jonathan remained silent for several long seconds, allowing Bradley's words to echo around the office. When he finally spoke, his voice had a cold quality that made Bradley realize he had crossed an irreversible line. "These people," Jonathan repeated. "Go on." But before Bradley could respond, his phone rang. It was Marcus Chun, his executive assistant and right-hand man for over a decade. A man whose unwavering loyalty and absolute discretion had been tested in countless delicate situations. "Excuse me," Jonathan said. "Marcus?" "Yes, I'm in a meeting, but you can talk." Marcus's voice was clear and professional. "Mr. Pierce, I've completed the analysis you requested on the employee evaluations from the last 5 years. The results are revealing." Jonathan had requested this analysis the previous week after noticing some subtle inconsistencies in Bradley's reports. What had started as a routine check now took on a whole new importance. "Send everything to my private email," Jonathan said. "And Marcus?" "Initiate a full audit of the hiring and firing processes. Discreet but thorough." Bradley watched the conversation with growing discomfort, not fully understanding what was going on, but sensing that it wasn't good for him. When Jonathan hung up, he turned his full attention to Bradley. "Now where were we?" "Oh yes. You were explaining to me about these people." On the other side of the door, in the library, Carmen was helping Jade choose children's books from the elegant shelves. The girl was fascinated by the colorful illustrations, but Carmen could hardly concentrate. Her mind was in the office, where her career and her daughter's financial security could be decided at that very moment. "Mommy, do you think the tall man is nice?" Jade asked, holding up a book about forest animals. Carmen paused, considering the question. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "He took my lollipop," Jade explained with childlike logic. "Bad people don't like candy." The innocence of the observation almost made Carmen smile, despite her anxiety. If only the adult world were as simple as a 5-year-old's perspective. In the office, Bradley was discovering that he had completely underestimated the situation. Jonathan wasn't just a billionaire too busy to care about operational details. He was a calculating strategist who had built an $8 billion empire by observing patterns that others ignored. "You know, Bradley," Jonathan said, sitting down behind his desk. "I've always admired your efficiency in keeping this building running. But recently I've begun to question some aspects of your methodologies." Bradley tried to keep his voice steady. "Mr. Pierce, if there are any specific concerns." "Oh, there are several," Jonathan interrupted, opening his laptop. "For example, in the last 5 years, you fired or reassigned 17 employees. Interestingly, 14 of them were Black or Latino. The documented reasons range from cultural inadequacy to communication problems." Bradley's blood ran cold. He had never thought anyone would analyze this data together, much less look for patterns. That's pure coincidence, Mr. Pierce. I hire based solely on qualifications." "I'm sure you do," Jonathan said, his voice thick with icy sarcasm. "And I'm sure it's also coincidence that the white employees you hire frequently receive raises and promotions, while the rest face unexplained performance issues." Meanwhile, Marcus Chun was in his own office 3 floors below, compiling information that would reveal a network of systematic discrimination far more extensive than anyone could have imagined. The data showed a clear pattern. Bradley Torres wasn't just a prejudiced manager, he was the architect of a system that kept ethnic diversity in the building to a minimum through subtle but illegal practices. Marcus, who had grown up facing his own challenges as the son of Korean immigrants, recognized the tactics. He had suffered similar discrimination early in his career, before Jonathan discovered him and recognized his true potential. Back in the office, Jonathan watched Bradley with the same cold intensity he used to evaluate business acquisitions. "You know what intrigues me the most? You actually believe that your actions went unnoticed. That you could build a discriminatory system right under my nose without consequences." Bradley finally understood the magnitude of his situation. He wasn't just facing a boss angry over an isolated incident. He was being confronted by a man who had uncovered years of illegal practices and was preparing a devastating response. "Mr. Pierce, I can explain." "Oh, you'll explain," Jonathan said, closing his laptop. "To the lawyers. To the investigators. And especially to every person you've harmed with your systematic prejudice." As the net closed in on Bradley Torres in the library, Carmen read Jade a story about a little butterfly that transformed an entire garden. Neither of them imagined that, at that very moment, a much greater transformation was being orchestrated just a few rooms away. And Jonathan Pierce, the man everyone considered cold and unapproachable, was about to prove that some injustices spark a calculated fury that can move mountains. What Bradley didn't know was that this conversation would be just the first move in a strategy that would expose not only his own practices, but a much larger network of discrimination that infected the corridors of power in Manhattan. The question hanging in the air was not whether there would be justice, but how complete and devastating it would be when it finally arrived. Marcus Chun entered the office carrying 3 bulky folders and a tablet, his serious expression contrasting with the controlled satisfaction in his eyes. "Mr. Pierce, the audit is complete. The results are devastating." Bradley Torres felt his last hopes evaporate as Marcus opened the first folder, revealing hundreds of pages of meticulously organized data. Colorful charts showed patterns that could not be explained as coincidence. "Over the past 5 years," Marcus began, addressing Bradley directly, "you have fired 17 employees for cultural inadequacy. 14 were Black or Latino. You hired 23 white employees for equivalent positions, even when minority candidates were more qualified." Jonathan watched Bradley with the same calculated coldness he used to destroy competitors in business. "Go on, Marcus." "The pattern goes beyond hiring," Marcus continued, turning pages. "White employees received average raises of 32% over 3 years. Black and Latino employees? 7%. Always with vague justifications about insufficient professional development." Bradley tried one last desperate gambit. "Those are just numbers out of context. You can't prove discriminatory intent." That's when Marcus smiled for the first time, opening his tablet. "Actually, we can." The screen showed a messaging app. "Do you remember these conversations with other property managers in the area?" Bradley's face turned gray as he recognized his own messages. Marcus began reading aloud. "Message from Bradley Torres to Robert Manning, September 23rd. Got rid of another one. I used the communication problems excuse again. These guys never learn they don't belong in places like this." "That's been taken out of context," Bradley shouted, but his voice sounded desperate. Marcus continued relentlessly. "Message from November 15th. The new policy is simple. Find any reason not to renew contracts. We have to maintain our standards. The residents pay good money not to have to deal with certain presences." Jonathan stood up slowly and walked over to the window. When he spoke, his voice carried a coldness that made Bradley shiver. 23 years building this building as a symbol of excellence, and you've turned it into a monument to prejudice. And there's more," Marcus added, opening the second folder. "We've obtained statements from 11 former employees. They all document identical situations: systematic humiliation, sabotage of their work, creation of impossible situations to justify dismissal." Bradley realized there was no way out. "Mr. Pierce, we can resolve this internally. There's no need to involve." "Involve who?" Jonathan interrupted, turning with a cold smile. "The lawyers who are already reviewing every contract you've ever signed? The Department of Housing that will receive a full report tomorrow morning? Or perhaps you're referring to the 23 media outlets that will receive detailed evidence of systematic discrimination in Manhattan's most expensive residential building. Reality hit Bradley like an avalanche. His 20-year career, his reputation in luxury real estate, his contacts, everything was being systematically destroyed. Marcus opened the third folder. Then there's the financial irregularities. Surcharges applied only to minority employees, fabricated administrative fees, unexplained payroll deductions totaling over $80,000 over the last 3 years. That's theft, Jonathan stated simply. In addition to discrimination, you're a common criminal. Bradley tried to stand, but his legs gave way. You can't destroy me like this. I have a family, a mortgage. So did Carmen, Jonathan replied coldly. So did all the employees whose lives you ruined because you decided they weren't worthy of working in the same building you managed. Marcus closed the tablet. The police will be here in 40 minutes to escort you out. All your access to the building has been revoked. Your personal belongings will be sent to your residence. But before that, Jonathan added, you're going to do something you should have done years ago. He picked up the intercom phone. Carmen, could you come to my office with Jade? There's something important she needs to hear. While they waited, Bradley attempted one last desperate negotiation. Mr. Pierce, if this becomes public, it will damage the reputation of the building as well. Think of the value of the apartments. Jonathan laughed, a humorless sound that made Bradley cringe. You think I care more about real estate values than doing the right thing? When this story goes public, and it will tonight, this building will be known as the place where discrimination was exposed and eradicated, where justice triumphed. The door opened and Carmen entered hesitantly, holding Jade's hand. The girl still clutched the remains of her lollipop and smiled when she saw Jonathan. Carmen, Jonathan said gently, I'd like you to hear this directly from Mr. Torres. His eyes turned to Bradley with unrelenting harshness. Tell her about his standards. About how she and employees like her don't belong in places like this. Bradley stared at the floor, unable to lift his eyes. Has he lost his voice? Jonathan asked sarcastically. Then I'll tell her. He turned to Carmen. For 5 years, this man has built a system to prevent people like you from working here. He fired employees for being black or Latino, stole wages, created deliberately hostile environments. Carmen listened silently, but her eyes filled with tears, not sadness, but validation. All the little humiliations, all the subtle comments, all the time she had felt she was being treated differently finally made sense. But today, Jonathan continued, that ends. Mr. Torres has been fired. He is being criminally prosecuted. And you, Carmen, if you accept, I would like to promote you to assistant manager of this building, with a salary that reflects the true value of your work. Jade, who had listened to everything with the limited understanding of a 5-year-old, approached Bradley. Why did you treat my mommy badly? She asked with devastating innocence. Bradley finally looked up, meeting Jade's pure, questioning gaze. In that moment, facing the simple question of a child who had offered him a lollipop without any prejudice, all the ugliness of his actions became undeniable. Police sirens could be heard approaching on the street 47 floors below. Jonathan looked out the window and smiled, not the cold smile from before, but something genuinely satisfied. You know, Carmen, he said, watching Bradley being escorted away by security, there's something poetic about how this started with Jade offering something sweet to a stranger, and ended up exposing the bitterness that infected this place. Carmen hugged Jade tightly, finally understanding that lollipop had been more than a childish gesture, it had been the catalyst that would change their lives forever. But as Bradley Torres faced his dramatic downfall, one question remained. How would an entire community heal from the wounds left by years of systematic discrimination, and what other transformations would that simple act of kindness still bring about? 6 months later, Carmen Rodriguez walked through the penthouse corridors with a completely different demeanor. As assistant manager, she had implemented new hiring policies that made the building a model of diversity and excellence in Manhattan. Mom, look. Jade ran through the main hall, now decorated with colorful plants she had suggested. The garden has grown. The girl, now 6, attended an elite private school but retained the same sweetness that had won Jonathan over on that first day. Bradley Torres, on the other hand, faced a very different reality. Fired for cause, Sued for discrimination and embezzlement, he had lost his home on Long Island. No company in the luxury real estate sector would hire him. The story had spread quickly throughout the industry. "Mom, did you see the news?" Marcus Chun showed Jonathan an article in the New York Times highlighting the building as an example of social transformation. 17 candidates requested a transfer to work here after the changes. Jonathan smiled, watching Carmen explain protocols to new employees with a mixture of firmness and kindness that Bradley had never possessed. Funny how we discover that competence has no color when we stop looking for excuses for our own mediocrity. The irony was delicious. Bradley, who had always claimed to uphold standards of excellence, had been replaced by someone who actually implemented them. Resident satisfaction ratings had reached historic highs under Carmen's management. "Uncle Jonathan." Jade ran to hug him, still calling him by the nickname she had invented. "I brought green apple lollipops today. Would you like one?" "Always," he replied, accepting the candy with the same genuine smile that had appeared on that first transformative day. Bradley had tried to destroy Carmen out of prejudice, but he ended up destroying himself. She had learned that true revenge is not about repaying the harm done to you, it's about achieving the success your enemies could never imagine. And as Jade handed out lollipops in the hallways, spreading sweetness where bitterness had once reigned, one lesson was clear: sometimes, all it takes to change the world is a child brave enough to offer a stranger a piece of candy. If this story of transformation and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that genuine kindness always wins over prejudice disguised as tradition.